Good evening, everybody. We're continuing our search, our path, finding our own path to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the path of the just, using the path of the just by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzato's book, Mesilas Yesharim. We're in the chapter 11, which is about nikiut. It's called cleanliness. And basically the idea of nikiut is that even when a person has, so to speak, done the first clean out of himself and now does not transgress the Torah's negative commandments, but there's still a level where he may not be actually physically doing those things which are wrong, but he's still attracted to them. And part of nikiut is to remove that underlying desire. That's one part of nikiut, and the other part of nikiut is to be aware of all the protim, the minutiae of what make up the issur, the things that a person has to avoid. And as he says in the previous chapter, that the way that you get to this higher level, even though it's something which is to do with the desire of a person as opposed to his physical actions, is this principle we've dealt with before, which is acharei pa'ulos nimshichem halavavos, that the heart is drawn after the actions. When a person habituates himself to act in a certain way, this eventually becomes part of who he is, part of his emotional reality. An example of that, for example, would be the reverse of that was the Nazis. The nature of a human being is to be kind. People are generally kind. But the Nazis, through their training, inculcated cruelty into their youth, into their soldiers, it had to be done in a, till that became second nature to them. So the reverse is true, that a person can inculcate into himself the midah of nikiut. He can by repeatedly avoiding those things that the Torah prohibits, he will find eventually that he's not so drawn to them. And of course, it's a lifetime work. A person can become more and more naki. And we're now dealing with a chapter which talks about the kind of areas in which of course, he says in every mitzvah there's a possibility, there's the potential, there's the necessity to reach this level of nikiut. But he identifies just the more obvious areas where nikiut is required, necessary, and probably more difficult, to the extent that a person desires the thing that he's trying to free himself from. And as it said, most people, we've been talking up to now about theft. Now, we're not just talking about, obviously, guys with bags with swag marked on them, exiting from people's apartments. Theft can be very subtle. You can steal somebody's sleep by making a noise in their room. You can steal things from people by misleading them. There are all kinds of theft, and the nature of a person is a person has a natural desire for money, to have the status of money, to have the power of money, to have the things that money can buy. And therefore he has to beware, because the nature of a person is to try and find all kinds of heterim, all kinds of, permissions, all kinds of ways. Leniencies, right. Ways to say, well, it's not so really bad, or everybody does it, or etc., etc. So he's really talking about that now, and this idea, we're halfway through this idea of nikiut, cleanliness, when it comes to financial dealings. So we're going to start, in my book it's a paragraph, Re'eino, this is where we left off last week, Re'eino bi'inyene ha'ono. Look at the matter, the subject of fraud. Kama nokel hu la'odom, lehis patois ulikoshel. How easy it is a person when it comes to defrauding people. I'm not talking about, again, massive Bitcoin scams and this kind of thing. We're talking about not a level of dishonesty, which is because he wants to profit from it. How easy it is for a person to be seduced and to fall into this aveira. Kasher l'choyer yireh Eloi, sheruihu lishtadel v'liapois l'choyrosoi be'inei hanoshim. For example, somebody who's trying to sell something, he understands that it's part of the business is business, right? And you need to make your wares, your merchandise as attractive as possible. And so what is he there? In order that he should speak to the heart of the buyer, in order that he should buy it. Now, of course, modern day advertising has raised this to I don't know if the word art is quite the correct word, but you see that advertising has got really very often nothing to do with the product itself. Advertising, you see adverts which for toothpaste, which have people driving around in sports cars, and it means that use our toothpaste and you'll be driving around in a sports car leading the life of a celebrity. What's one thing got to do with the other? Hopefully you'll have clean teeth at the end of the day, but that's not the way you sell something. This is a kind of dishonesty, because it's really manipulating the underlying desires of a person in order for them to buy the product. So that's what he's saying exactly. You're speaking to the heart. What really does a person want? When a seller is trying to figure out, whenever he sees somebody's buying, what does this guy want? And I want to try and show him that that's what he's going to be buying, right? And that could be that he's bringing out the virtues of a certain product. But we see that's in a certain sense that could be acceptable. But very often he's twisting or he's angling his pitch, as they call it, in order to hit the emotional target that he wants to get in order to trigger the response to make him buy it. And this, you see, is all over the place. This has become, on the media now, everywhere, a fine art of how to trigger people's emotions to get them to buy things that very often that's not exactly what they wanted, or there could be a better one that's more suited to their purpose, but you spoke to their heart. Excuse me. Vayomru Chazal said about this, I'll call there, Yesh Zoriz Nisko. So excuse me. Not Chazal. Take it back. Yomru, people who want to make a profit and justify, rationalize the distortion of their advertising, of their presentation of their product, and they find justifications. They say, Yesh Zorez v'nistaker, Nisko, the alacritous person, he's the one who profits, right? I think that in English maybe it comes out something like the early worm, what's the early bird that gets the worm? Yep. Or some people say it's the early worm that gets the bird, and the lazy people say that one. But you got to do it. You got to, get ahead. You got to sell. V'yad charutzim ta'ashir, the hands of the diligent will become rich. All of these phrases which are true, but they're very often misappropriated and used in order to justify things which are basically dishonest, lies, geneva, theft. Omnam im lo yedaktek, but if a person is not careful, yishkol ma'asov harbe, and weigh his actions a lot, and check what he's doing. Hinei tachas chita yetze ha choach. Under the wheat will emerge the thistle, the nettle, the briar. Hidden underneath all this nice talk and this advertising is really a sheker, is a lie. Excuse me. Ki avo v'nishkol, v'nikshol, because this person will transgress and stumble. Ba'avoin, in the sin of honah, fraud, and of course, fraud it doesn't necessarily mean grand larceny, it means deceiving people. Ashes huru aleh, that the Torah itself warns in Vayikra, as it says, lo sonu ish es amiso. A person shouldn't abuse, he shouldn't take advantage, extort in any way his neighbor. Chazal teaches based on this pasuk that no, I don't think it's based on this pasuk. Yes, because amisoim, that's talking about his people, and even though that it shouldn't be, you should not allow to abuse your fellow Jew, but Chazal also teaches that even to form any kind of trickery with a non-Jew is forbidden. Ukra ksiv, and we have in Sefania, it says in the Novi, Sheir Yisrael lo yasu avla v'lo yidabru kozov, that the remainder of Israel, the Jewish people, it's referred to here, will not do avla, iniquity, v'lo yidabru kozov, and they will not speak twistedness, v'lo yimotze b'fihem loshen taramis, and there will not be found in their mouths a language of deceit. meaning that they're going to falsely advertise something which is not true. V'chein omru, and it says in Bava Metzia, Ein mefarchesin es hakelim hayeshonim sheyeru kachadoshim. A person's not allowed to beautify or touch up second-hand goods to make them look new. This is like a well-known trick if you go to I guess used car salesmen have got a bad rap, but this is something that very often when people go to buy a second-hand car, if you know what you're doing, you can take a car which is not particularly new and make it look pretty good if you know where to touch it up here and there. And of course, unless you know something about cars, but the idea being what? You want to pass it off as a new car. That's theft. That's called stealing. Plain and simple. And ein ma'orevin peirus bepeirus. Also, when a person is selling grain or fruit, he's not allowed to mix up two fruits from two different fields and sell them as they're all coming from one field, even if those other fruits may be just as good. It's deceit. Afilu chadoshim b'chadoshim. And even if those fruits are both new, they're not old, they're of equal quality. And also, this is an interesting thing, he says, Va'afilu so bedina, even you have grain. Let's say you're not allowed to even to mix up new grain with old grain, and even if the new grain is only worth a saw, one saw as a dry measure, is worth a dinar, and you're mixing that up with old grain, which is worth more, which is worth a dinar and a tarisis. Trisis, Trisis is a small amount than a dinar. So the old grain is actually worth more than the new grain, but you're not allowed to mix in the old grain into the new grain and pass it off as new grain. Lo yorevei v'yimkarem sa bedina. And even, this is amazing, you're not even allowed to sell it at the lower price. Again, why? Because it's misrepresentation. When you're selling something to somebody, they have to understand what it is they're buying. And any distortion is called thievery. If not nothing else, it's genevus das. It's stealing their minds. Kol oise eleh, kol oise ovel. Anybody who does this, even as we said before, selling at the lower price for the better quality, but it's not what the person wanted. He wanted the new grain, and in there is the old grain, even if it's better old grain, nevertheless, that's called ovel, that's called iniquity. Ukriya Hashem Shemos, and a person who does this, the Torah calls, Hashem calls the following. A person who does this is called the following. He's called an avol, an iniquitous person. He's called sonoi, hated, mushukatz, disgusting, cherem, banned. He's in cherem, he's in excommunicated. To'eva is disgusting, another word for disgusting. So all of these things apply to this person, and to our minds, maybe we'd say, well, it's not so bad. You see how serious the sin of misrepresentation when you're selling is. Od Amr Zichron L'Rocha, Chazal also say in Bava Kama, Kol hagoyzel es chaveira afilu shave pruta ki'ilu notel nafsho mimenu. Anybody who steals, in whatever fashion it comes out, something which is worth a shava pruta. A shava pruta is the minimum amount of money that's called money. Anything which is considered to be legal tender, even the smallest amount that is considered to be like he killed him. He took his life. So you see how you see the seriousness of this sin. Even in a small amount. For Amr Road, it says it's in Gemara in Tainus. The only reason that rain is withheld is because of the sin of theft. And it says in Vayikra Rabbah in the Medrash, Chazal say, Kupa Meleya Avonos Mi Mekatreg Barosh Kulam Gozel. Let's say, God forbid, a person that has a jar, a kupa, a box, full of sins. Which is the first of those sins which is going to stand up and accuse him at the time of his judgment? Theft. Theft is going to be the one to lead off the accusation. Again, the idea is to show how serious theft is, even in a small amount. V'dor hamabul no nechtam gezed yanom ela al gozel. The generation of the flood, even though the generation of the flood were guilty of other sins, serious sins, sexual immorality, but they were sealed, their judgment was sealed to destruction. And only because, why? Because of theft. And if you'll say in your heart, this is probably a question you'll ask yourself, well, hang on a second, why isn't that human nature to want, when you're selling something, to make it appealing to somebody? And what's so wrong with that? So says the Mesilas Yesharim, chiluk gadol yesh b'davar. There's a great difference here. Ki kol ma shehu laharos es hakonim amitas tuv hachefetz v'yofio. Anything that a person does to show the buyer the truth of the good of the thing that he's selling and its beauty, to bring out features that it has. I don't know if it's a computer, or you can do that, or it's a whatever it is. It's a guitar, it has like you can swap this button here and it sounds like humbuckers, or single coils, or whatever it is, a car, tennis racket, whatever you want. Anything you can draw attention of the buyer to its genuine features, that's for sure permissible, and a person should do it. Hine, that's called hishtadlusu. That effort, making that kind of effort, is good and straight. But when a person obscures the mume cheftzoi, the defects of the object he's selling, it's forbidden to hide over the blemishes. Just 1 second, I want to check something here. And a straight person should point it out. He should say, you should understand that it's got, because covering over the blemishes is also, is also a way of stealing. If you know something's wrong with this car, then, that it's got about another, 100 miles on the clutch, and that's it. Right now, you can't really tell that, but the last time it went in for a service, the service guy said to you, look, this clutch is going to be needing repairing in 500 miles time, and it's like you've had 450 miles out of the car. You've got to tell the guy. To cover that over is called theft. This is a great general principle in the buying and the affairs of buying, in the trustworthiness or the faith of business dealings. Anything you can do to draw attention to the thing's advantages, its genuine qualities, is right and proper to do. Anything where you even cover over a blemish, that is also. And of course, lo oima me'inyan hamidos. We don't need to talk about the idea of weights, the accuracy of weights. Shari beferish kosu bahem. So it says in the Torah, beferish, talking about somebody who has bad weights. The weights are, in other words, they make it seem that what you're selling is more than it really is. That's Tovas Hashem Elokecho Kolo Se'ela. It's a disgusting thing to Hashem. Anybody who has weights which are not accurate. Va'omrun, it says in Bava Basra, Kasha onsha shel hamidos me onsha shel arayos. The punishment for a person having bad weights which are inaccurate, is more serious than the punishment for promiscuity and immorality. For Omru, Avraham, it also says over there in Bava Basra, Hasiton Makane Midasav Achas L'Shloshim Yom, that a wholesaler who obviously is moving a lot of stuff through his warehouse, he has to check his weights that they're accurate every 30 days. He has to clean them, clean his weights. All of this why? And in order that he shouldn't, give people less than they should be getting without realizing it. And as a result of that, he won't get punished because he checked his weights. Now, kol shekein oven haribis, all the more so, is the sin of ribis, of taking interest. Shegodlhu bekoifer be'elokei Yisrael. That the sin of ribis, the sin of taking interest from a Jew, is considered to be like denying the existence of the God of Israel, chas v'shalom, like atheism. For Omru Zichron Levracha, and the Chazal taught us on the Pasuk in Yechezkel, Beneshech Nosan, Uvatarbis Lokach, Chayoy Lo Ichye. Somebody who gives with interest and he takes with another kind of interest, that is, his life is no life. His life he will not have life. She'eno chai lischayev hamesim. What does it mean that he's not going to rise up at the resurrection of the dead? Ki hu va'avak shalo, because he and his dust is meshukatz, is disgusting, umis oiv be'enei Hashem, and despicable in the eyes of Hashem. Very strong words. I see no reason to lengthen, to go into greater length or depth about this. Shekavaim a moso muteles al kol ish Yisrael, because the fear of this is already placed on every Jew. Omnam, he's going to sum up now. Klal shel davar, the general principle, the underlying principle here is kamo shechemda samam and rabba, to the extent that peoples have a tremendous, strong desire for money, one of the greatest desires in the world. Cain, michshalos of rabbim. So similarly, its traps and the stumbling blocks and the pitfalls, that's the word, are also very, very many, commensurate to the desire that a person has for money, people have. And again, so we're talking about being clean here. For a person to be totally clean of these things in truth, Ian Godel, he needs to look very carefully, examine all of his dealings in great depth. V'dikduk rav tzorechlo, and he also, apart from his analysis of what he's doing, he has to also be very careful as to what in practice he goes on to do. He needs to spend a lot of time analyzing what he's doing and how he should do it, and be careful that his actions match up to his analysis. V'imnika mimenu yeda, and if a person does manage to reach this level, he should know he has already reached a great level. Ki rabim yischasdu ba'anofim rabim ma'anfei hachasidus uve'inyan sinas habetza lo yochlu lahagia el mechoz hashlemus. Interesting idea, because there are many people who are able to become, he uses the word chasadim. They can become a chosid, can become not just a person who is a tzaddik. Again, the difference between a tzaddik and a chosid is a tzaddik who does everything that's written in the Shulchan Aruch. A chosid is somebody who goes beyond the letter of the law. So many people can rise up above what is required by the Shulchan Aruch, by the halacha, in many areas of life. And in all of the many different branches where a person can become, in this way, a chosid. And when it comes to the hating of profit, sone betza, meaning being very careful when it comes to money, they're not able to reach to this aspiration, or rather to reach to this perfection of nikias when it comes to money. Humasha amrat sofa hanaami le'iyov. This is what sofa hanaami Na'amosi. Tzova Na'amosi, I think, was one of the advisors that Eov, that Job had. And he said to him, it says in Eov, Im avon biyodcha, if you have a sin in your hand, harchikeu, distance yourself from it. Va'al tashkein bo'alea avla, and do not allow iniquity to dwell in your tent. Ki oz tisa panecha mimum, because va'isi mutzach v'lo tira, because then you will bear your face mimum from how does he translate this? Ki oz. I'm not sure I got this. Ki im.
I'll read the whole thing. You'll pick it up. The word is: if there is iniquity in your hand, put
Yeah.
it far away.
Right.
Not perversion dwell in your tent.
Right.
So then you would lift your face without blemish.
Ki oz, because then tisa panecha, you'll lift up your face mimum without a blemish. Vayisa mutzak, and you'll be clean, clear. V'lo tira, and you won't fear. Okay. V'nei says the Mesilas Debati adheina. I've spoken up till now. Miprote mitzvah achas mina mitzvahs. I've spoken just about the details of one mitzvah. The mitzvah to be careful in your financial dealings when it comes to money. Gezel. Uchaprote chalukim eila. Vade shenimtzah b'chol mitzvah mitzvah. And these minutiae, these details, which I've discussed in this particular mitzvah, you will find in every mitzvah for sure. I said this at the beginning. Omnam eineni maske ela oisam sheragilim rov b'nei odom likoshel behem. But I'm only going to mention those mitzvahs which the majority of people stumble in them, fall into the trap where these particular things are concerned. Now, so that's the end of his discussion onto money. The next thing he's going to move on to is promiscuity, immorality. V'nadaber ata. And let's now talk about arayos, promiscuity, sexual immorality. Shegam heim min hachamurim. This is also amongst the most serious sins. Veim shniyim b'madrega el gezel, and they are only second in the level immediately after theft. Chazal say in Bava Basra, Kuf Samach Hey, Amud Beis. Rubam Begazel. Most people stumble when it comes to theft. Umiutam Ba'arayos. And a minority when it comes to immorality. Vinay mi sheyirtze lahinokois the gamrim mizeh hachet. Somebody who wants to completely clean himself from this particular chet. Gamlo titztarich melocha lo mu'etes. He will also not. He will require more than a little effort. It's obviously ironic. He'll need a lot of work. Ki ein bichlala isa gufa shel maaseh bilvad. Because when we're talking about being noki when it comes to arise, we're not just talking about the act itself. Elakol hakore velov. Anything that comes close to it. Umikra molehu. And we have many sayings in Chazal, in Vayikra, Lo sikrav legalos erva. It says in the posik that's in the Torah. Do not come close to reveal the nakedness. This is talking about sexual immorality. Amr zichron levracha. What does that mean? Amr Kadosh Baruch Hu. Al toima. Don't say ho'il va'osuli lishtamesh ba'isha. Saying it's forbidden for me to have relations with the woman. Hare tovsa. Okay, fine. So I can hold her. Ve'enli avon, I won't have a sin because I didn't actually have relations with her. Or hareini magapfa, I could embrace her. Enli avon, because the only thing that's wrong is to have relations. Oh, sha'ani noshka, or I give her a kiss. Ve'enli avon, and I won't have a sin because again, Omar Kadosh Baruch Hu, says Hashem, Keshem she'im noda nozir shelo lishtos yain. Just as when a nozir, somebody, a Nazarite, when he prohibits himself from drinking wine. So it's not just wine that's prohibited for him to drink. Also, it's also for him forbidden for him to consume lechal anovim, to eat grapes, lachim if they're moist, v'yaveshim or if they're dry, I guess they're called currants or raisins, or mishras anovim, grape juice, v'chol ayotze migefen hayayin. Anything that's a product, an edible product that is, of the vine is prohibited to him. And of course that's the eraisa, that's min haTorah. But Chazal took their cue from that. Af isha she'ena shelcha, a woman who is not yours, asa ligaba, it's forbidden to touch her, kol ika at all. For kol mi shenogea be'isha, somebody who touches a woman, she'ena shelo, that's not his wife, maybe misa la'atzma, he brings death to himself. V'habeit ma niflu divrei hamaymer hazeh. This is Maimar Chazal. See how extraordinary these words of Chazal are. Ki himshel esa issa hazeh lenozir. Because the issa of immorality, promiscuity, is compared to the issa of the Nazir, of the Nazarite. Asher af alpi she'ika issa ena ella shtiyas yain. Because even though the essential issa is to not drink wine, hine osru la Torah kol ma sheyesh loi shaychus imayayin. The Torah osurs everything which is connected to the wine. V'hayazeh limud, and this is the the paradigm that shelimda Torah lechachamim, which the Torah taught to the chachamim when it comes to the issa of immorality. Eich yasu heim hasiag l'Torah b'mishmeres shenimsa b'yodam la'asos l'mishmarta. How the Chazal was supposed to go about creating boundaries and fences to protect people from coming to the issa itself. Ki yilmadu min hanozir, because they will learn from the nozir. Le'asor ba'avor ikka, to us as because of the essential avera. Gam kol the domile, everything that's similar to it. V'nimsha sa'asa ha'torah b'mitzvah zois shal nozir ma she'mosra l'chachamim shiyasu b'sha kol ha'mitzvahs. And so they use this, as we said, as a paradigm from the Nozir as to how they should go about giving restrictions in all other areas. Laman das shezer ratzonu shel mokum. In order to put people to understand that that's what Hashem wants. Hashem gave us the paradigm of the Nozir to understand that when it comes to any kind of restriction, keeping far away from any kind of Aveira, this is the pattern that Chazal should adopt. Ukesha lona echad min ha'asurim, and when the Torah offers to us any one of the isurim that it does, yilmad sasum min ha'meforish, we should learn what is not spoken out explicitly from that which is. Le'asar kol hakorav lo, to make osa everything. Chazal, to learn to make osa anything which is close to it or would lead to it. V'alzeh derech osra b'inyan zeh shel arayas kol ma shehu mimino shel aznus o korov elov. And therefore that's why Chazal osad anything which was close to the actual act itself, and it would be be'ezer chush, and whether that would be in whatever of the human senses that may be. Shi'er dahainu, it could be bein b'masa, physical action, anything which is physically close to sexual relations, or bein b'riyah, whether it's sight, bein b'dibur, whether it's speech, bein b'shmiya, whether hearing. All of these things are going to be osa, even though the Torah doesn't say so, but the Torah gave us this paradigm by which we're supposed to learn, and Chazal taught us that all of these things are also osa. Va'afilu machshava, even thinking about things of that nature are osa. Va'ata avi lecha rayos al kol eila midreihem zichron leroch. I'm not going to bring you proofs to what I'm saying from what Chazal say, but maaseh, in terms of action, dahainu hanagia o hachibuk ukayotze. In other words, touching, but of course not talking about actual physical relations. Why? How do we know that touching or embracing, similar things to that, how do we know that's also? So kavan is lamala. We already explained above, but ma'ama zichronu, zachronu ve'ein tzarech la'arich. We already said before. We don't need to go into that again. Now, what about sight? Be'ira. Amruzal, liyad liyad lo yinoke ra. The one, it says in Brachos, hand to hand, he will not be cleaned from evil. And Chazal explained what does that mean. It's a posuk, I think, in Mishlei. Does he say where that posuk is?
Mishlei.
In Mishlei. That's a posuk in Mishlei. But the Gemara in Brachos explains what does that mean. Kol hamaratze ma'ois. Anybody who counts out money when he's giving money, paying a woman in the shop, miyoda liyoda, from his hand into hand, and he takes his time over doing it, kadei listakel bo, in order that he can look at her And listakel doesn't just mean, quickly glance. It means having, I guess you'd say in English to ogle, to take a good look at her. Lo yinakem midina shel Gehinnom. He will not be saved from the din of Gehinnom. Meaning, even though it's not an issa d'oraisa, the Rabbanan it's also to do, and he will be punished for this. He will not be saved from the din of Gehinnom. Again, because why? This is something he deliberately went out to do. Now, of course, maybe we should add here. I think I'll just go point this out, and then we'll finish off in a couple of sentences. Obviously, we live in a world where probably the majority of people that we're going to come across in the street are going to be women. The thing is that a person, there's much to talk about here, but maybe we'll just say a few ideas. First of all, the issa, as we saw, is histaklus. Histaklus is looking in a way which is to derive pleasure. Histaklus means to look with the idea that you want to look to have pleasure from looking. Of course, if you're walking out in the street and you should try and guard your eyes as much as possible. There are several things you can do to train yourself. For example, I'll give you a very good example. If let's say you're in the base medrash and a whole pile of books falls down at the back of the room. So everybody goes, what's going on? So don't look. Don't look. Why do you have to look? Or, people are digging a hole in the road and you'll always find a crowd of people around that hole. I mean, what are they looking at? Or a jet goes overhead. If a person trains himself not to look at things which are really at the end of the day not particularly attractive, I mean, how attractive is a hole in the ground? How attractive is a pile of books falling down? But if a person practices that midah, if he goes to the boot camp and says, I'm not just going to look wherever my eyes want me to go, then when he comes to a situation where there's something that his eyes, is far more attractive, and the nature, the yetzer of a person wants to see with a great desire far more than seeing some hole in the ground, he'll find that he will have a little, and of course the more he does this, the ability to control himself. But of course, there are persons walking out in the street, there are going to be ladies in the street, and inevitably you're going to see, but you can look and you can look away. You don't have to gaze, you don't have to ogle, you don't have to histakel. This is a very important lesson. And I think a person, you can train yourself, you can build up your muscles. But the Torah is talking about the issa here was the issa is doing something which is going to bring you into, deliberately, you're going to count out that money very slowly so that you can take a good look. Okay, let's just finish off. So he said, "V'omru od, mipnei ma shehutzricha Yisrael ba'osa hador kapora." Why did the Jewish people in that generation, require atonement? Mipnei shezonu eineihem mina ereva. Because the word of zonu means a zona is a prostitute, but it can be used as a verb when referring to the eyes. It doesn't. You can't say it in English. Their eyes prostituted, but that's the idea. They allowed their eyes to feast on things which were nakedness, erva, issa. Omar Rav Sheshes, mipnei ma, Rav Sheshes mima mona hakosef tachshitin shebechutz im tachshishim bifnim. Why does the Torah equate jewelry worn on the outside of the clothes with jewelry which is worn under the clothes? Lo malacha, to tell you, kol hamistakel be'etzba katana, anybody who gazes at the small finger of a woman, ki'ilu mistakel, it's as though he looked at something which was a very private part of her. V'amru od, and it also says, v'nishmartem mikol davara, guard yourself, it says in the Devarim, for anything which is all evil things. Shelo yistakel odom be'isha na, that a man should not stare. Yistakel, again, it doesn't mean look, it means have a good look for the wrong reasons. At an isha na, a beautiful woman, v'afile hi pnuya, and even if she's single, and he shouldn't stare at an eshes ish, a married woman, va'afilihi mu'cheres, and even if she's ugly. Be'inyan adibur, also speaking to a woman. Behedya shanina, we learned explicitly in the Mishnah in Avos, Kalamar be'sicha ima isha, anybody who lengthens, who speaks to a woman more than is necessary. I mean, of course, that doesn't mean you have to be rude. You're in a shop, you can ask somebody for what you need, but you don't need to say more than is necessary. Kalamar be'sicha ima isha, gorem ra la'atzma, he brings bad evil to himself. Kashmir Amru, and as we know that it says when listening to a woman, now this is specifically I think about singing, listening to a woman's voice singing is called erva. Kol ba'isha erva, a woman's voice is considered to be nakedness. Okay, next week B'ezrat Hashem we'll go on and we'll talk about nivel peh, about obscenity and how serious that is. Okay.